paradigm change. So we basically divided the agenda into 4 parts. I'm going to talk to you first about how we're positioning high-quality core curriculum as sort of a cornerstone to the MTSS model. Catherine's going to talk to you about defining high-quality core curricular materials, referencing our CURATE rubrics, which we'll get into more. Then we're going to spend a little bit of time diving into a CURATE report. If you don't know what CURATE is right now, don't worry, you will before you leave. And then Catherine's going to close us out with some tips for skillful implementation. So that's our rundown. We've been instructed to try to stay behind the podium. So if I'm standing back there, don't think I don't want to be closer to you, because it's not my style. But we're going to do the best we can for the video's sake.
And Ron, can I say something about the sticky notes real quick? We've tried to put sticky notes on the tables to capture questions as they arise, because there's probably too many people to do it verbally. So if a question occurs to you, put it on a sticky note, and about halfway through, when we have a work time activity, we'll come get them from you and just try to answer as many as we can.
So the sort of centerpiece of the day today and tomorrow is the MTSS blueprint, and we are fortunate to have one of the lead authors in the room. I'm going to give a way in, Kristen. So this is a...
That was kind of weak, I just got to say.
That was
That's because they know me, that's why.
I tried to clean it up.
Sorry.
Oh, it's fine. So this super accessible and beautiful document that is grounding all of the conversations today features this schoolhouse graphic that sort of describes how the state is thinking about tiered systems of support. And the very bottom tier, the universal support, tier 1, in the description of that, the blueprint has this quote here. And why we're fronting that at the beginning of this presentation is just to ground us all in the notion that high quality core instruction is really the foundation, the strong foundation upon which a successful tiered system can be built. And we see high quality curricular materials as an absolute cornerstone to establishing that strong tier 1. And so we're basing this session on 2 basic premises. 1, every teacher deserves access to high quality instructional materials, and then, by extension, every student deserves tier 1 instruction that benefits from the coherence and organization and consistent approach that you find in high quality instructional materials. So those are the 2 premises that are going to guide us today. I'm going to really lean into the whole school building analogy for a moment, so just indulge me. Hopefully this resonates and doesn't look silly to you. This is Quincy. This is my 7-month-old baby. And I want you to ignore him, despite how adorable he is. I want you to ignore him for a second. And I want you to focus on what's behind Quincy. This is very fancy wallpaper, and it's in my house in Quincy's bedroom. Quincy's bedroom didn't used to be Quincy's bedroom. We live in the city, and we do not have extra rooms. And so Quincy's bedroom used to be my wife and our home office. And when we moved into the place several years ago, we decided to put this very fancy wallpaper on this one particular wall in what was then our home office, now Quincy's bedroom. Why, you might be asking yourself. Wallpaper's so passé. Why did you put this very fancy wallpaper on this one wall? And the reason we did is because behind this wall, which you cannot see anymore, there is a deep fissure that runs down this wall. Our house was built in 1888. A deep fissure that runs from the ceiling all the way down to the floor. In parts, it's like 3.5 inches wide. It's all soft in the middle. I don't know what's going on in there. At the time, I lacked any sort of home ownership skill and did not know how to deal with this fissure. So what do? We just put this fancy paper up and just wallpapered right over it. Guess what's happening now that Quincy's established in there and it's his room? Wallpaper's pulling apart. That fissure's peaking its ugliness through. Okay? And so, if you could indulge me in that ridiculous analogy, what I want to hammer home is trying to compensate for poor quality craftsmanship in the core instruction, in our case that fissure, by papering it over with even the fanciest interventions and supplements, still does a disservice to the tiered system as a whole. And so by adopting high quality core materials, or in our case, fixing that problem with the wall, is one way to ensure that all students are having access, regular access every day to on-grade level tasks that are organized in a coherent way. How did that work? It's the first time I've ever done it. Did that work? You like that? Kind of cute. Yeah, you like that? Good.
But we want to know what happened to the wall in a couple months.
Exactly.
We want there to the story at some
Yeah,
point. Right?
exactly. There'll be another chapter in the story. So for the rest of the day, I want to ground us in two key definitions that we've been using for the last 18 months or so related to instructional materials and curriculum. So these are our standard DESE definitions for both curriculum materials and curriculum. And I think the easiest way to understand these, that we felt it was important to define these two things because curriculum gets thrown around in different circles in education, and what people are meaning when they use that word is a million different things. So when we use the phrase curriculum materials, we're talking about the things that you might have heard referred to as the written or documented curriculum, or adopted curriculum, the stuff you've purchased, or the stuff your teachers have built. That's curriculum materials. And for us, curriculum is what the students experience, otherwise known as the taught curriculum. And we know from research and we know from practice, there are usually differences between what the students experience as the taught curriculum and what is on the written page of the materials teachers are using. And in many cases, those differences are really important to what the students actually get.
I'm going to sit right there.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
So a couple of years ago, DESE started to take note of emerging research in this field of curriculum materials. And we learned a few things. And I want to point out that for folks in the room that have been at this game for a long time, this is just confirming your intuition about what makes good instruction anyhow. But now there's this significant research base to back this up. And we have citations that I can share with you that dig into all of these claims. But first, materials matter. The stuff that you give teachers that then they give students makes a big difference in terms of outcomes. The second, good materials make the art of teaching an easier endeavor. Teachers are going to spend time planning. And what we want to do is make sure that that time is best spent in service to the unique needs of the kids that are in front of them 5 days a week. And if we're asking them to not only prep those materials for use with their kids, but also go find the materials in the first place, we're doubling the burden. And finally, well-aligned materials are not necessarily more costly than poorly aligned materials or lower quality materials. This is especially true as open educational resources gain momentum. There are lots of publishers now that are making the materials themselves open source, free to download and use. They try to make their money by offering fantastic, or maybe not so fantastic, professional learning that's aligned, but the materials themselves are there for people to download and use. So the marketplace is different than it was just even 10 years ago. Katherine, go ahead. So you may have had this experience, and this is another new one, so you tell me if this works. I'm trying to make this a little bit amusing. So I'm calling from a district, DESE, can you help us pick a new math curriculum for the middle grades? And you might have received an answer like this.
No.
Right? We don't do curriculum. Right? There's always been this firewall between DESE and curriculum. If you call us and ask us that exact same question now, you might receive an answer like this. So we are now trying to get into a position where we are able to actually provide useful information about the curriculum materials marketplace. And the way we're doing that is mainly through a project called CURATE that I'll dig into in a moment. We spent a couple years ago, we spent some time doing stakeholder outreach with folks like you, asking, is this firewall that's been established for generations, where the State Department doesn't provide any support on or guidance on quality instructional materials, does that need to be there? Is that fixed? And what we learned by talking to curriculum directors and teachers and principals and superintendents through that outreach is actually the help was sort of welcome. As long as we don't go too far down the road of like mandating specific products or prohibiting the use of others, as long as we aren't going there, as long as we're in this place of helping to make informed decisions, the help was welcome. And we feel like we're well positioned to provide that kind of support. We have access to cross-state networks. We have access to large-scale research partners. We can do everything at scale. And so we've developed this theory of action around high-quality instructional materials and professional development. And basically, what we're saying here is if you all have the support and information you need to make good decisions about materials, and if we can collectively build sustainable professional learning structures that rely on collaboration, that help teachers use those materials well, then student outcomes will improve. And so CURATE is our first foray into this space. I'm going to pass out, I hope I have enough, I think I do, just these little infographics, thank you, Katherine, about CURATE, and I'm going to go over sort of how this project is structured now in case you're not familiar. Just by show of hands, how many people have heard of CURATE? Oh, that's awesome. I love it. So CURATE is an opt-in process. Publishers request that their product go through our review. That's the very first step in CURATE. And we ask them to not only provide sample materials, any research that exists about the efficacy of their work, about the efficacy of their project. We also have specific prompts that were informed by Massachusetts educators that they wanted to know that sort of go beyond what we can typically find on the internet about a given curriculum. For example, what effort has been placed on creating a curricular package that represents diverse people and perspectives? Super important when we talk to Massachusetts educators, and not readily available in any other sort of objective review of materials. So that's something we asked about. The second step is we gather additional evidence beyond what the publisher submits. We gather additional evidence. So we have a relationship now with edreports.org. How many people have heard of edreports? Great. edreports is a tremendous resource for looking at comprehensive lesson-by-lesson reviews of curriculum in grades K-12 for ELA and math, and right now 6-8 in science. They're building out their science work to eventually get to K-12. So we have a partnership with edreports. We get all of their publicly available reports and some additional evidence that they've collected in the process of their reviews. And then we collect feedback from Massachusetts educators that are actually using the materials in their classrooms. One of the things about edreports is they have teacher panels convened of people that don't necessarily have experience using the materials. So they're digging into each lesson and they're digging into each unit, but with fresh eyes, not with actual eyes that have used the stuff in their classrooms. And so we wanted both perspectives. So we bring in Massachusetts teachers that have experience with materials as our additional source of evidence. Then we have panels of Massachusetts teachers, our CURATE fellows, that deliberate. So they look at all of this evidence that we've collected, and they weigh it against rubrics that Catherine's going to get into in a moment, and they come up with consensus ratings for the curriculum. And at that point, a draft report is assembled. How many of you have downloaded or looked at a CURATE report on our website? Okay, a few hands. They're up there. They're cool. We'll look at them in a little bit. And then after the draft report's assembled, the publisher has a chance to review the report before we publish it and to point out any factual inaccuracies and also write a response that gets appended to their CURATE report. So there is, for each curriculum, there's a short response from the publisher about the report. In some cases they're happy with the report, in other cases you might imagine they're less than happy. And then finally, our CURATE report is published with that publisher statement at the end. And that lives on our site as part of this dynamic website that allows you to sort of jump around to the different reports. So that's CURATE in a nutshell. We're going to spend more time talking about some of the details around CURATE, but it's all, again, just to connect back to what we're trying to communicate with this session. It's all about raising the bar, raising the floor of that core Tier 1 instruction. And that's what we're looking at.
You want to take my spot?
Sure.
Good afternoon, everyone. So Ron started us off by sharing that high-quality standards-aligned curricular materials are one of the cornerstones of solid tier 1. And it turns out that defining high quality is complex. So I think everybody in this room would agree that they want and have strived to get high-quality instructional materials in all their schools, but it's not so easy to know exactly what you're looking for when you're out there looking for high quality. I've asked a lot of people in positions like yours how they chose their current curriculum materials. The most common answer is they chose something that was used popularly in their region. And that can be one marker of high quality, but I don't think it correlates at 100% with high quality. If you've gotten a chance to look at our curriculum heat maps on the DESE website, it's a really cool tool. We made a Google map and have a little dot on there for everybody whose curriculum we know what they use. And the number of dots on that map demonstrating that a curriculum is popular does not match up with quality according to EdReports or according to CURATE. Some of the ones that are really popular are not doing well on their CURATE or EdReports review. So just keeping in mind that that level of incidence doesn't correlate with quality, but it can be really interesting to look at and see who's using what. So how do we define high quality? Luckily, we have rubrics for that. Like all things in education, we like to measure it with a rubric. EdReports has an excellent rubric that you can look at that defines high quality in math, ELA, and science. For the CURATE project, we've made Massachusetts-specific rubrics that are on our CURATE website. It's very similar to the EdReports rubric with specific dimensions built in that look at alignment with our standards and what we're looking for in Massachusetts. For instance, I'm an ELA person. I can share with you that the CURATE rubric for ELA, the EdReports rubric for ELA doesn't emphasize whether or not texts highlight diverse perspectives and diverse authorship and characters. And we've tried to represent that more strongly in our CURATE rubric because we often hear from people in Massachusetts that cultural relevance and reflectiveness is so important. So there are some differences, and I think our CURATE rubrics are really strong. The rubric in Massachusetts that we use for CURATE, it's important to know, is also very intentionally aligned with everything else we have going on at the state level. So when we talk about standards alignment on a CURATE rubric, we're looking at alignment to Massachusetts standards. When we talk about usability for teachers on the CURATE rubric, we're aligning that with the standards of effective practice that you're familiar with from the educator evaluation system. It's aligned with elements of universal design for learning. So instead of feeling like there's a whole bunch of different qualities or initiatives that are not connected, the CURATE rubric has taken all those things into account and will help you judge whether or not a curriculum product meets the needs as defined in all those areas. I want to point out, just from my personal experience, how much I think rubrics can protect us from over-focusing on some qualities of a curriculum while ignoring others. In my previous position, I was a curriculum director, and we did a curriculum adoption, and we came up with our own rubric. I thought we did a pretty great process. We got teachers and principals around the table, and we all listed everything we would want in an ELA curriculum, and we made up our own little rubric. But guess what was on the rubric? All the stuff that we knew about and had expertise in from our own backgrounds and from our district. So we prioritized a couple of things like that the curriculum is very strongly supported for English learners, because we had a lot of English learners and we cared deeply about their success. And we had a lot of really young green teachers in our district, so we were looking for a curriculum that was highly usable and had a lot of explanatory material for teachers. That's great, but we totally forgot to pay attention to a bunch of other things that weren't necessarily our wheelhouse. We didn't look at whether the program had strong phonics and phonological awareness components for our young readers. We didn't look at whether the program was culturally responsive or reflective of multiple perspectives for our students. So we just really went with our pet kind of instincts because we weren't using a more comprehensive look at quality. And so that's where I think the power lies in these rubrics. Speaking for myself, I feel like I know a lot, but not everything, and using a rubric like this that has been built to be comprehensive checks you and makes sure you're not leaving anything out. So how can you use the CURATE rubrics? I think simplest, easiest answer is if you are considering putting new curricular materials in place in your school or district, you can use the rubric to evaluate the materials you're considering. Perhaps you're considering this fancy new program that everyone's talking about called Wit and Wisdom, and you want to know if Wit and Wisdom is a high quality program, you can use the rubric to evaluate it. You can look at the CURATE report. However, if you're like George Washington in Hamilton, you might be saying, not yet. Our district is totally not interested in adopting a new curriculum right now. We just got one last year. Or we have a curriculum adoption cycle and we're not doing it for 4 more years. Okay, maybe you're not there yet. There's still a couple of other ways you can use the rubrics now. One would be to jumpstart a conversation about your district priorities. You might, with your leadership team, want to look at these rubrics and see what feels like the biggest priority for your district or your school, so that you have that conversation and lay that groundwork so you're ready for when the day comes to go into the next adoption cycle. It's very powerful to use these rubrics to audit the materials that you already have in use. District developed curriculum, as you all know, is very common in Massachusetts, and sometimes it's well developed, sometimes it's still in the process of being developed. If you want a really objective way of knowing how good, where's our district developed curriculum at, you can evaluate it with the CURATE rubric, the same rubric that's used to evaluate published curricula. And finally, if your district is anything like mine, we lacked a district-wide understanding of the characteristics of high-quality core curricular materials. We may have been using those words, but we weren't all talking about the same thing. So just by studying these rubrics, you can build a shared understanding of what a strong curriculum would really look like for your kids and what's a priority for you. So with that, I'm going to ask that we pause and actually take a look at the CURATE rubrics. I think some of you may have seen the CURATE reports or website, but not the rubric itself. And want to make sure we built in time for you to do that and to take for us to take your questions. We have paper copies that Ron will pass out. You can take either a math or an ELA or partner up with somebody and look at both. If you want to also just hold your phone up to that, this QR code will pop you, just open up your camera, point it at that, and it will pop you over to our page with our rubrics. You'll see a standards alignment domain and an accessibility domain. And what I'd like you to do is explore the rubric a little bit and talk with your team or people at your table about how you might use the rubric now. You might be coming up on an adoption cycle. How could you use it in there? If you're not changing your materials anytime soon, how could you still use the rubric now? And depending on the conversation and how it goes, we'll give you 5 to 10 minutes to explore on paper or on your device and have this conversation at your table.
That was pre-planned work.
Are there any questions about what you're seeing in the rubrics or comments you want to make? Yes.
Is the state working on one for social studies?
We are. So that one has not been started yet, the rubrics. One other thing I'll ask before we move on to the next section is we're always recruiting new CURATE fellows. You have to be a current classroom teacher to be a CURATE fellow. There is a stipend that they receive that usually ends up equating to around $1,500 for a semester's worth of work. They meet like 3 or 4 times over the semester. There's an additional financial component if they review more additional curricula than we originally think they're going to. So usually between $1,500 and $2,000 would be what the stipend would look like. The teachers that have been in it for a year that came back, they are talking about how great it is as a professional learning opportunity. Many of them are reporting taking back what they've learned and now are advocating to have some of the products that they've never heard of or been exposed to brought to their district, which is exciting and encouraging. It's a really good teacher leadership opportunity, and we know that those are few and far between. So if you have great people that you want to recommend, you can email me or Katherine, and we will get them routed to the right folks to get seated on our next panels, which will launch in the spring. We just kicked off our fall panels. Okay, so you just dug into the rubrics. I'll say once again, any other questions about the rubrics themselves as tools?
This may be a longer, I'm just curious, how would you maybe tie this rubric to the Massachusetts Massachusetts resource guide. You know the guide, for students with disabilities that's on the continuum?
Yes.
If you were looking at that, because we've been sort of looking at a curriculum, and I'm just curious, is there a way that you can think of off the top of your head to tie the two together?
So we've spoken with the folks from DESE that work on the resource guide and work to make sure that that guide is generally aligned to the things that we're doing out of our shop. The audience for that is usually students that are severely or significantly disabled. So we have to do some more thinking, I think, about how to make those connections between the two really concrete. It's a good suggestion. Anything else? Okay, so we're gonna, again, give you another chance to dig into something. This time it'll be a CURATE report. You've just looked at the rubrics that the fellows use. Now we want to give you a chance to look at the fruits of their labor, which are these reports. So same as we did earlier, there's a QR code that you can snap with your phone. There's also a bit.ly. We did not print hard copies of the reports because frankly they don't print that well, and they're much more interesting to navigate in the dynamic environment. So I do encourage you to take a look at can you advance the next one? You can take a look at either set of materials that you haven't heard of before that you might want to get a quick snapshot. You can think about connections between the language in the final report and the rubrics you just dug into. You could also look at something that you are familiar with. I already heard someone say, oh, I use this product and it's in CURATE, and see if the reports confirm or rebut some of the findings in those reports. One really important thing to think about when it comes to curricular materials is the addition is super important. All right, so folks in the room may be using Wonders 2020, which we have not reviewed, but looks really promising in ed reports, versus Wonders 2017, which has a middling ed report, and which we did review, and you'll see for the middling report. So make sure you're thinking about which edition of the materials. We are really clear in the reports which one we reviewed, which one we were asked to review by the publisher. But that's really important as you're thinking about how it relates back to decisions that you might make. One of the most exciting things about all of the work happening across the country, spurred in large part by the state of Louisiana and ed reports, is we've seen now even some of the larger publishers that have been publishing the same product for many, many years, making huge shifts in the design of those products so that you do see things like an Envision 2.0, which doesn't perform well in ed reports, versus the newest version of Envision, which comes out really strong. So we've seen lots of shifting in quality, even within the same program line, which is encouraging. So snap the QR code, type into bit.ly, whatever's easier for you, and you'll launch the reports. You can look on with each other if not everybody has a device, and dig into the reports. So you'll see a bunch are coming soon. Those should be out within a month or so. We're basically waiting for the final response from the publisher to get appended onto those, and then they'll be posted. And at this point, if you have any other questions, jot them down on the Post-its. Katherine and I will come around and collect them, and then we'll try to answer as many as we can. We're doing high school math this fall, and we start elementary math in the spring. Any other questions about the reports? So hopefully they inspire you to come back to the site as more reports are loaded in. You can see different products and how they're stacking up. One of the things we found really interesting as we've begun to collect information from you all about the products you're using is there are a bunch of really high quality curricular materials that are not in use in Massachusetts virtually at all. So Carnegie Learning's math solution, the graphic I had up there a moment ago. When we were looking for survey sites for this product to get feedback from Massachusetts educators, it was really challenging. Almost no one in Massachusetts is using this, but as you can see, our CURATE panel really liked it, and it also fares pretty well in endpoints. Wit and Wisdom for ELA is another one that's gaining some steam here, but doesn't have a lot of market share on the ELA side. And that report's going to come out soon for us, and it's really strong. Any other questions about the reports, or CURATE in general, or anything we've said up to this point? All right, yes.
From a principal's point of view, I think it's an awesome resource that is available to us.
Thank you.
It just, you want as many choices as possible in your grade band, so it'll be great when it's expanded.
Great.
A little more, but I
Thank
think
you.
it's a great idea.
That's a helpful endorsement. And if you have questions in the meantime about things you see up that you don't see in CURATE yet that you're curious about, it may well be that we've learned something about these products, and you should definitely call us or email us, and we can share with you what we know, or even connect you to other districts or buildings from out of state that may be using the materials.
So to conclude today, the fourth part of our presentation is around skillful implementation of high-quality curriculum materials. As I was circulating, I heard a couple of people are engaged in this conversation in, like, what about the teaching? Doesn't the teaching matter more than the materials? Or can you have pretty poor materials and really excellent teaching and still get good results? And what's the intersection of those two things? So to bring us back to the beginning of that conversation, Ron started us off by connecting MTSS, which is what we're all here to learn about today and tomorrow, with high quality instructional materials, which we say so often that we have to abbreviate it to HQIM, because it comes out of my mouth 100 times a day. So we believe, and research supports the assertion, that high quality curriculum is an essential piece of a high quality core, that it just moves the starting line forward. If the teachers are working with poor curriculum materials and teaching their butts off using excellent instructional strategies, they will still, in many cases, do better if you move that starting line forward so that the materials they were working with were high quality, aligned to standards, and provided accessibility for diverse students. So we firmly believe that having high quality core curriculum materials in place moves up that starting line. Or what did you say, Ms. Meyer, raises the floor? Raises the floor, another good analogy. But it's not the end game. These high quality materials have to be skillfully implemented. And one of the things that you hear all the time is that materials don't teach the students, teachers teach the students, and a bunch of people are like, yes, I say that all the time. We believe that too. The materials don't do the job. You can't just buy the materials, deliver them to the classrooms, and assume, wait for the scores to go up. The teachers have to implement them skillfully and in the manner in which they were intended to get the results that you're after. So the implementation is a huge piece of this. One of my colleagues recently said, the adoption of the materials is the wedding, the implementation is the marriage. It's a lot longer and it's a lot harder, but you probably want to actually do the wedding first, just get that part done, but then you still have to worry about the marriage. So big message here is that teachers using high quality instructional materials still plan daily lessons. You do not want to be cracking open the book and reading from it, because that reinforces the idea that this is a script. No material, no matter how good it is, works that way. So if you are in a place of, or getting ready to, or one day will be adopting new, strong, high quality core curricular materials, you want to frame that with the idea that even after we buy these and bring them in, or download them from the web if they're free, everybody's still planning their own daily lessons to meet the needs of their students. A couple of questions that teachers still need to ask themselves. How will I apply the principles of universal design, multiple modes of engagement and representation, so that all my students can be successful? How will I scaffold and accommodate so that my students and all of their diverse learning needs can access the content and be successful? That's a huge one. No curriculum can give you the scaffolds and accommodations that your kids need. And then how can I make this material culturally relevant for my students? No curriculum is maximally culturally relevant for everyone. It depends on who your students are and who your community is. So that's a decision that the teacher can make too, to enhance cultural relevance. So skillful implementation is the term we like to use. It does not equal fidelity. I have pretty much moved away from using the F word. I feel like it was a big thing during Reading First when we talked about adopting core curricula, but I really don't say that anymore because I think it has taken on the meaning of script. And I think people associate it with this whole canned curriculum, scripted curriculum. It has a very icky connotation to it. And it's also not, we don't want anybody cracking open the book and reading the script. We want skillful implementation, although the word skillful means something very particular to us. Go ahead, Ron. So high quality instructional materials have a sophisticated design in which every choice is purposeful and builds upon each other over time. So for instance, in a high quality ELA curriculum, there might be daily read alouds at the beginning of the year, and then a read aloud 3 days a week later in the year, and then a read aloud once a week at the end of the year. You can't just mess with that. It was done that way for a reason. There may be a vocabulary word that's taught in week 2 that pops up again in week 4. You can't take that out because then something will go wrong in week 4. We call this breaking the design. These high quality curriculum materials are not the basils of old. The design is very sophisticated in any subject. Things very strategically build and spiral upon each other in both the content and the instructional routines. So we don't want, like, I get very icky about the word tweaking. When people are tweaking their curriculum, it just makes me worried that you're making willy-nilly changes that could break the intentional design. What we want is skillful implementation, making decisions that you are making purposefully, not breaking the design. So it's really a fine line of like, no, don't implement with fidelity. You get to make adaptations. You have to make this work for your students, but that doesn't mean turn around and chop it up and take in and out whatever you want. It's making those informed decisions. So, I don't use Facebook. I'm a proud Facebook hater, but I did download the thumbs up and thumbs down for this slide. So, skillful implementation, what it really looks like, we have to offer PD that helps teachers understand the purposeful design of the materials. So teachers really know why the instructional routines are in place on the days, weeks, and units that they're in place, what they're supposed to do for the students, and how the content spirals. So that when they make changes, appropriate changes, they're not breaking anything in the design of the curriculum. They can make their informed adaptations to supplement, to target, to increase cultural relevance to meet the needs of their students, no matter what subject they teach. What we don't want, rollout PD. Okay, we have to roll out the curriculum. We have to show them how to open the box, the teacher's edition, guided reading books. We have to do the little overview, but it can't stop there because that is way not a deep enough understanding of how this curriculum is designed. That's just the beginning. So only doing the rollout PD where teachers are then off tweaking, potentially taking things out or putting things in that break the design gets you into trouble and can undermine the sophisticated design of this wonderful product that you're The last thing I want to talk about is the ongoing professional development piece. I just said that a rollout is like great, and we want to do that, but it's not enough. We all know teachers need professional development on the new curriculum. I think that's a trope. You hear it so often. But what do they need to learn to do with that curriculum to be successful? There's actually a wonderful body of research on this, which I find very helpful. This is a recent paper from a Harvard researcher and her colleagues who did a meta-analysis, so a study of studies, on what helped teachers best improve their instruction in STEM. So they looked at, I think, 90 studies of instructional improvement approaches in STEM and what helped the teachers improve their instruction the most. We found that instructional improvement works best, and they looked at a million different things, by the way. Works best when focused on building knowledge teachers can use during instruction. Knowledge of the curriculum materials they will use, knowledge of the content and how content can be represented for learners, knowledge of how students learn that content. So really knowledge of the content, not unpacking standards or looking at data or instructional strategies and teach like a champion, like stuff that's general, but things that are very specific to their curriculum and their math or their science. And although this was a STEM article, I would surmise and hope that this would also be true for Yale University. So 5 areas that I would encourage you to focus on when you're planning your professional development, especially when you have a new curriculum. What are things that the PD should actually entail for you to have a sense that you'll get results with improved instruction? Number 1, we already talked talked about this one. Teachers are supported to deeply understand the materials the way they're designed and built. This allows them to make appropriate adaptations and skillfully implement. The second thing is, teachers plan together in teams for upcoming lessons using their materials as a basis. So raise your hand if the teachers that you work with have some sort of PLC or common planning time. Okay, great. So an important first step with that time is to ensure that they have the curriculum materials with them at the meeting, and they're not doing some type of learning or collaborative work that has nothing to do with their curriculum. And then once they're at the meeting with their curricular materials in front of them, they can be planning with questions like, how can we universally design the activities in this lesson? What types of scaffolds might our kids need to be successful in this lesson? Having those conversations is what results in instructional improvement. Next, teachers use and work within their curricular materials during any PD. No instructional strategies isolated from their curriculum. So I'm totally guilty of doing PDs on things like student engagement or grading or a million other things that were relevant and necessary, but I didn't talk about the curriculum at the same time. It was like, here's a great PD on student engagement. No, you go figure out what this has to do with your ELA curriculum. Whereas I should have had the PD be, we use wonders. How do we engage students in the upcoming lessons of wonders to make it directly relevant to their implementation? This is the one I see least often in all my travels around the state, and I've worked out of state as well. I've only seen this in a couple of schools, but it's highly supported by research as effective. Teachers talk together about the content. So not even talking about their students learning yet, but just talking about the content. For instance, teachers discuss their interpretation of the theme of an upcoming story and the best evidence to support it. So the second grade teachers would literally sit around and say to each other, what do you think is the theme of Officer Buckle and Gloria? Can you support why you think that is? It is shocking to me how rarely they agree on answers to questions like that and how enriched their understanding of the story is through that conversation. And it's dramatically increased for an 8th grade teacher, 8th grade team who might be discussing whether or not Animal Farm is an effective allegory. Like, of course they disagree on their initial answer to that question. It's an engaging, compelling question, and by discussing it, it so enriches their ability to engage with students in that question. So I found those conversations remarkable when I listened to them, and they're equally remarkable for math and science, talking, for instance, about what are the multiple ways that students would represent this problem, and is any of them more or less appropriate or beneficial representation. And finally, if you ever get around to reading that Heather Hill article that I showed, you'll see that they found data meetings are an ineffective form of instructional improvement and don't recommend them. The reason is that it too rarely translates to changes in instruction. They might sit around and talk about the data and what the students need, but then it does not translate to the changes in instruction. What they do recommend is calling them planning meetings, and you might bring the data to your planning meeting to think about what students need and where they're struggling, and then directly applying that to your upcoming plans. So never separating conversations about data from conversations about instruction, and really framing them as conversations about instruction, not about data. So this package, can you go back for a second, Ron? This package is everything we've gleaned from the research about skillful implementation and how to ensure teachers are implementing the curriculum at a high level. And if you were to adjust your professional development to meet even one of these, it would be an improvement. And if you were to have all 5, you would really be like the rock star curriculum implementation and professional development. Yeah, go ahead.
So my question about that is, you said that this is how you skillfully implement. Is that skillful implementation directly tied to student results? And where's the data on that?
So the studies like the one I showed are looking at whether or not instructional improvement is effective by looking at the change in student performance. So in that case, there's data in that report. And like I said, there's not a similar report for ELA or literacy. So that's an extrapolation that we have to make. There's individual school examples, but not studies of that that I'm aware of. Yeah, and actually there's like a practitioner version of that article that's much more readable and easy to digest with recommendations. So I can pop that into the folder for the session, and people would find that reference helpful to see what the data really says.
Will CURATE expand to include SEL curricula?
SEL?
Curricula? No. Doing other
Probably not, and one of the reasons why is we're relying on having existing third-party objective detailed reviews of curricula. So what that's meant in practicality is head reports. If a curriculum publisher has another third-party report, like from the Louisiana Department of Ed or some other source. Right, so we have nothing to build on. Similarly for history, social science, we're in a similar bind where CURATE can't be replicated for that subject area. We have to figure out another way to help districts make their decisions.
Any other questions?
I want to thank you so very much for attending the first day of a 2-day institute. The rationale for starting this was to support practitioners in the field who love the idea of tier systems of support and really just wanted some tangible resources and time to think through the planning and implementation of that. We're so grateful to our Department of Education collaborators who not only supported getting this up and running for districts, but also coming in and giving some really strong content to our presentations. We will be back tomorrow. All of the materials for session 2 are online in the day 2 folder. Make sure our devices are plugged in tonight and charged in preparation for tomorrow. We very much value and thank you for your time today. I'll stick around if you have any feedback or questions you need in terms of the conference itself. If not, have a fabulous and safe trip home. We'll see you.